Where can you find the best opportunities in a market? And for that, I mean any market, really. Obviously, we're talking about sports trading here, but this applies to life in general. So I almost called this video Learning to Deal with Uncomfortable Psychology, or Learning to Deal with Uncomfortable Psychological Effects, because that, in essence, is what it's all about. And the funny thing is that over the years, I've learned that and you've probably heard this phrase before, but the only way to make good money is to do the opposite of what everybody else is doing, or what the crowd is doing. And I would say that that actually rings true, because all of the best opportunities that I've ever come across have always been counter to prevailing wisdom. And I find this on a regular basis, because even when I talk to people about what I've done over the last decade or so, people don't believe it or can't understand it, or they'll come up with a whole list of reasons why it's not possible. And I'm saying to them, well, it is, because I've done it. But people say, oh, no, 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 no. And you tend to find that human psychology plays a big part in how opportunities are created. So there's this famous book, Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, and explaining all sorts of weird moments in history where everybody's just gone completely mad. And the problem that you have is humans are a social animal, and therefore, in order to fit into that mix, you have to do what others do or conform to a certain standard of behavior. And when you do that, you basically assimilate and become the crowd. Whereas in fact, very often the crowd can deviate massively away from where it really should be, but everybody goes along with it simply because that's what everybody else is doing, and everybody feels this need to fit in. But what I've learned over the years is that the best opportunities come from not fitting in. And the difficulty with that is people will keep on reminding you and telling you why you're wrong and why it's not acceptable, and you need to adhere to their point of view, or else you will be cast out. And the problem is if you want to be successful, you have to get used to that, because nothing useful ever comes from doing the same as everybody else. You have to think differently in order to make a difference or to stride forward on something. So when I first started attempting sports trading, I remember saying to my dad, I've come up with this great idea about how to make money from sports betting. And he said, oh yeah, I came up with that ages ago. And basically, after we lost, we would then double the stake. And, and I said, no, it's nothing like that. It's completely different. And everybody, absolutely everybody, not a single person said to me, why didn't you, oh yeah, that sounds good, why didn't you do it? Everybody said, don't do it. It's not worth it. You've got three young children. My twins had just been born. And I couldn't find a single person to affirmatively say, go along with what I was going to do, apart from my wife, who actually said, you know what, if you want to do that, then you do that. And ever since then, it's always been the same. Everybody is telling me all the reasons why I can't do it, or why something that I've said is not true. And I've sort of, it used to be frustrating, but now I just sort of think, well, it's not my problem. I don't care. I've done it. I've done all these things. I'm still doing these things, and it's really not an issue for me. And I learned this with investing as well, in that if I bought the most popular stocks, I would always yield less than if I bought the most unpopular ones. But in fact, buying the most unpopular ones is a simple strategy, but it's not easy to do, because everybody thinks you're a complete idiot. And the interesting thing on sports trading is that you tend to find that value, either in terms of outright betting or in terms of trading, exists predominantly in the areas where people are least likely to find it. So typically, some of the best trades come from the price, and something's coming in. Everybody's piling in on it. And it's at that point that I think, you know what, I think this is going out. And when you're betting, people predominantly don't like to be active in certain parts of the market. If you say to somebody, would you prefer to back with £10 to win 100, or would you prefer to win 100 by laying, would you prefer to win 10 by laying 100? Everybody will say, well, I'll back. So that tells you immediately that there's a bias in the market. And that's psychological. If you Google prospect theory, you'll learn all about people's misinterpretation of risk. Now, the fact is, if you back with £10 to win 100, or you lay with 100 to win 10, If the odds are the same, there is no net difference between those two positions, but people will do one more than they predominantly do the other, and that leads to distortions in the market. And you see the same thing with trading as well. People, I learned this on tennis, it was a harsh lesson for me. I would back an opponent on the basis that they were going to come into a match, and then I would see the short-priced favourite demolish them, and they'd be 2 sets to love up, and they'd be 30 love on their serve, and I'd think, oh well, this position is lost, I'm just closing this out, I'm getting out of here. But the wonderful thing about tennis is actually very often the best opportunity to get involved in the market is at exactly the moment when you think it's least likely. And I've tended to find that that's true of all trading and all risk taking, that in fact when the crowd goes in one direction, you want to be looking in the other direction and trying to figure out where the opportunity is. And it can actually yield some pretty good rewards. So yeah, I'd summarise that in general, I'm a contrarian, whether it's to do with investing or whether it's to do with sports trading. I tend to try and look for contrarian positions, places where people are least likely to be, not only because it doesn't seem to make sense in general, but from a psychological perspective, people would have either given up on their positions or feel that it's a stupid thing to do. And I put an example on the blog not so long ago about short-priced football teams. In all of the databases that I've looked at, it actually made sense to back teams at ridiculously short odds. But the fact is people will never do that, never do it, because A, they could make a lot of money for very little risk by laying them, and they will be seen as a god for having predicted it. But also imagine that you back £1,000 at 102 and you lose. You're going to look like a right idiot, especially if you go publicly and say that you've done it, and people will remind you for the rest of your life what an absolute idiot you were to lose so much money on such stupid odds. But the fact is, value may lie there. You need to identify if value's there. But if value does lie there, you would be stupid not to do it. But nobody does. So yeah, always take a contrarian view. I'm not saying that it will work all of the time, but that's where you tend to find most of the value.